Hey everybody, welcome back to Avondale Sky Winery. I am Karl Coutinho, along here with our winemaker Ben Swetnam, and we'd like to welcome you to our virtual March 2022 Sky Club release. We are looking forward to seeing many of you in person on Sunday, March the 13th, but for those of you that cannot make it, hopefully you can follow along with us at your convenience with our virtual release here today. So we've got quite a spectrum of wines. For those of you who are either new or have been in the club for a number of years, this is probably the most variety in one release. So hopefully you enjoy them all. And of course, Ben can talk us through them. So which one are we going to start with today, Ben?
We're going to start off with the sparkling Frontenac Blanc. This is from the 2014 vintage, so it's been aging slowly on the lees for quite a few years.
Okay. And what vineyard did we get this one from?
So this one comes from Goose Vineyard, which is just outside of Truro.
Okay. Thank you.
And yeah, Frontenac Blanc, it's kind of an interesting variety in that even when it gets nice and ripe, it really maintains quite a high acidity. And so as a result, this wine has the highest dosage of any sparkling that we've ever made, which balances out. So there's a little bit more sweetness to this than even the Benediction, which would be the next sweetest sparkler we do.
Yeah.
And just to balance out that acidity, so it's got that kind of sweet and sour thing going on. And yeah.
No, it's nice. It's definitely different than the other sparklings, but there's a good amount of bubble in it for sure.
Yeah, and it's got kind of a tropical fruit forward kind of nose with kind of like mango, pineapple, that kind of thing going on, which is pretty unique for Nova Scotia, I think. And then there is the site of the vineyard. It's kind of like almost gravelly.
Okay.
So there is a bit of that kind of mineral note, and then of course a bit of just roundness and leasiness, that kind of like toasty bread kind of character from the time in bottle on the leaves before disgorge.
Which is constant with most sparklings, right? To have that sort of flavor.
Yeah, for traditional method, and the longer they spend aging on the leaves, the more intense that character becomes in the wine.
In terms of the pairings, like food pairings, because I know in the past year we've had, I want to say, Benediction, Lackady, Blanc de Noir. So that, you know, if you've been in the Sky Club for the last year, you've received definitely 3 different sparklings. And where this one fits in, do they all pair with the same sort of thing? Does this pair with something different that the others wouldn't, would you say?
I mean, certainly there's some things that all of the traditional method Nova Scotia sparklings would pair with things, you know, like seafood and raw food and salty things. This one, where it has that, you know, that extra bit of sweetness and acidity, I think it holds up to things that are a little more on the intense flavor scale of things that are a bit spicy, and things that are just, you know, a bit more like we actually had this with some Chinese food the other day. Pretty strong, bold flavors in Chinese food, and it worked great.
Oh, excellent. Okay. One question I want to ask you is, for those out there, I know a lot of people like to swirl their wine glass, let the flavors kind of come up, or to the nose. You don't do that with sparkling.
Ideally, no. I mean, out of habit, most of us in the wine world tend to just do it and then realize because all you're doing, the bubbles in the sparkling wine will lift the aromatics, so they don't need the swirling to open it up like a still wine does.
Right.
And if you do swirl it, all you're doing is just getting rid of the bubbles faster.
Right. So if you don't like the bubbles, then swirl away. But if you like the bubbles, then just enjoy them. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, this is good. Okay.
Yeah. And then we move on to the next one, which is the Chardonnay from 2018. So revisiting this wine after it's been aging in bottle for a little bit.
Okay.
and I think it's in a very good place now as far as its drinking window.
Sure. And so I know this was prior to us owning the winery, but I know that the 2018 vintage, we were affected by, thank you, quite a severe frost. And so can you speak a little bit about how this Chardonnay wine came about and sort of the complex, what makes it up?
Yeah, so the 2018, we had that freeze event in June. We lost, I think it was about 96% of our crop here. And we, knew that very early on. So right away, most of the wineries in Nova Scotia were on the phone to some folks who grow grapes in Ontario and to just kind of keep us going and supplement our production for that year. So we brought in a bunch of different varieties, some kind of like classic hybrids that we grow here, as well as some vinifera that they do really well in Ontario.
Yep.
And in keeping with regulations, there always has to be a little bit of Nova Scotia content in there. So
of course.
This one is mostly Chardonnay, but there's a little bit of Lacadie Blanc.
Okay.
Just to give it a little bit of a unique Nova Scotia feel. But Chardonnay is, I would say one of the things that Ontario really does an amazing job with. It really grows very well there, right? Grows very well year to year. And this, I think this one really shows pretty classic Ontario Chard on the nose. It's got that kind of peachiness, and then there's a bit of this limestone mineral character that comes through in a lot of the Ontario stuff.
Yeah. Now, with something like this Chard, what's the it's the same juice, let's say that would be made making an Ontario wine. What's the different profile? Is it just a little bit of Lacadie that you put in here, or would it end up tasting the exact same as, say, the winemaker would make with the same juice in Niagara?
I mean, it would vary. Obviously, every winemaker is different in how they make wine, what yeasts they use, what fermentation vessels they use, the temperatures that things are fermented at. So this one, it did, part of it fermented in a mostly neutral French oak demi-wheat, and part of it was done in stainless steel, so you get a little bit of that vanilla character as well coming through from just that light touch of oak.
Yeah.
And then of course, even at just 6% Lacadie Blanc, there is just some perceptible Lacadie character. I think it kind of brings out the sort of apple. Yeah. On the nose.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, it's been a wine that we've had for a number of years here, and it's quite popular. And I don't know if it's because people know the name Chardonnay, and sometimes you get, a customer in here who they haven't heard of a Chevrolet or a Teddy Cape or whatever, but they've heard of a Chardonnay, and so that they kind of gravitate towards something that's familiar. So I think it's been a popular wine, but it's just not one that we've released to the Sky Club as yet as a whole. And I think you mentioned it's showing well right now. And so would you say, from being a 2018 vintage, what's not the lifespan, that's the wrong word, but what's the peak drinking from here?
Yeah, peak drinking window for this, I think, it was great from release on, but I think it's starting to get a little bit of evolution on the nose, it's starting to show some tertiary characters. So I think the best drinking time for this would be in the next year or two. Okay. And then after that, it may last longer, but it may start to fall off. Sure. But it's definitely it's been on the upswing, and I think we're getting nearing the peak of the mountain. And you ideally don't want to go too far over the other side.
Yeah. There you go. So enjoy this one in the next year or two for sure. But very good. Thanks, Ben. Okay, I'm excited for this next one. I have not tried an orange wine before, so tell me about this, and then I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions that I have and that others have had for me.
Yeah, so if you haven't tried one before, you're in for maybe a bit of a shock.
Watch my face.
Orange wine, it's one of the oldest styles of winemaking that has recently experienced a real resurgence. Okay. And I think the primary like reason for that is a lot of this move towards more natural, more traditional winemaking styles.
Okay.
And so an orange wine is basically a red wine made out of white grapes, more
Okay.
or less.
Okay.
Typically like very low intervention. And so in the same, like I would say, like one way to describe it is it is the exact opposite of a rosé. That's where you have a rosé
Okay.
is basically a white wine techniques applied to red grapes.
Okay.
This is red wine techniques applied to white grapes.
Okay.
And so you get this really brilliant orange color from that ferment happening in contact with the skins and seeds of the grape, and in many cases, in this case as well, a certain amount of stem content as well,
Okay.
to give a little bit extra tannin and body,
Okay.
and that also it helps to keep the wine more stable, which allows for a lot lower intervention winemaking. So you may find like there's a little bit of sediment, things that'll form in this wine because no fining agents were used.
Okay.
Very minimal sulfites for this, because that the tannins in the stems and the skins, that kind of preserves the wine naturally.
Okay, so if someone were to find some sediment, don't panic. It's normal with an orange wine.
It's very common for something like this that has minimal filtration,
Okay.
no fining, all these things that you do to try and really just preserve the essence of the wine. It shows best if you can mess with it as little as possible.
Yeah.
And it's something that we always try and do, as much as possible in winemaking.
Sure.
But certain styles, you can get away with doing even less, and so this is one of those things.
Yeah, I know that the questions that people are always made from oranges, is there like orange fruit in it? And I was like, no, that much I know that there isn't, but I was curious to know. So I'm going to try this now. Not that it's a big shock here, but with this, where it's a white wine using red wine techniques, what's the ideal serving temperature? Is it room temperature? Is it cellar temperature? Is it chilled?
So for this one, like I would say lightly chilled or cellar temperature is pretty much your ideal drinking temperature for it. You don't want it like right out of the fridge super cold,
Okay.
because that's going to mute a lot of the kind of fruit character, and you're just going to get like the tannins and the acidity.
Okay.
But too warm is also not ideal for it, because it is it was made with white grapes, and I think it shows at its best in the sort of 12 to 15 degrees Celsius kind of serving temperature.
This is good. I mean, I don't know what I was expecting, and I think that's part of why it's kind of interesting, because it's like, is it going to taste like orange zest? But it's good. It's good, but it's unique.
Yeah. So I mean, I tell people, sometimes just close your eyes and pretend it's a red wine, and
Yeah, you know what? That's an interesting way to say it, because it's if it was red in color, you wouldn't think twice. You would taste like a red wine. So it just throws you off by looking at the color. And so, what do you pair this with? Is this food friendly?
Yeah, it is. It goes great with things that are kind of savory, things that are kind of salty.
Okay.
I think it goes great with anything that's got some mushroom in it.
Okay.
Anything with savory spices, but not like, I wouldn't go really hot spicy with this.
Okay.
And I wouldn't go super mild on the food either. Like, I think you want a bit of oomph to whatever you're having with this.
Okay. So when you're saying mushrooms, like maybe a pasta or like pork chop kind of thing, that could go.
Yeah, pasta, risotto, that kind of thing. Yeah, like I wouldn't go like a really delicate light white fish, or a lemon thing. Like, I think this wine, it's going to be kind of too much for that, because it does have that tannin backbone like a red wine, like whether it's a charcuterie board or like pork or mushrooms.
Yeah.
Even something with with some sun-dried tomatoes involved. Anything that's
I like
give
this.
you
No, it's good.
a bit of richness that'll pair well with the wine.
Yeah, and the reason I haven't tried one for a couple of reasons. We haven't really had it here at Avondale Sky for a number of years, not since we've bought the winery, and it's just one of those things that I have not really seen much in liquor stores and so on. So is that uncommon, or is that common that it's just not a widely available wine? Like even in Nova Scotia, do people make an orange wine every year, or?
Not necessarily. Some in many of the wineries, I think in Nova Scotia, you might actually find more orange wines than a lot of places, just because we tend to be more experimental out here, where we're a less established winemaking region. So I think there's at least 4 or 5 other wineries in Nova Scotia that make an orange. We don't make it every year, just because Petite Milo is one of those grapes that we unfortunately had some die off with the vines, where the roots were susceptible to phylloxera, and they started to die back. So we didn't have enough fruit to make it all the time. Yeah. And then of course the frost year, and then the following year with a winter freeze, 18 and 19 there was just no Milo to speak of. Right. Anyway.
Yeah. So it's a rare one that we make, and it's a small lot. So hopefully you guys enjoy it, and I'm pleasantly surprised. So we'd love to hear your feedback, though, either way, on how you like the orange wine, to see how much more of this we're going to make in the future. So great. And so what are we rounding it up with?
We're going to finish it off with the new vintage of the Newport.
Great.
And with its spiffy new label.
Oh yeah, no, this is good work. The local artist has actually done the design work, or the drawing of this label. So my brother Sean had well connected in the community. Thank you very much. And she allowed us the rights to use this for the label, which I think is fantastic. So hopefully everyone likes the look. And I know we had Newport from 2014 more recently at the winery, and sold out this past, or I guess the 2021 summer. And so tell us a little bit about maybe the differences of the 2016 to the 2014, or more or less the same.
The sort of Newport, which is like our take on a port style wine, but obviously can't call it that outside of Portugal.
Yes.
It's that program here has been kind of evolving over the years. So when we first started, the Newport was only aged for 8 to 12 months in barrel, and then the reserve version was aged in newer Canadian oak, so it had more of an oak influence, and it was aged a bit longer. And then as things evolve, like, I'm able to keep the wine in barrel longer and longer. Okay. So this one, 2016, so it's been in barrel for roughly 5 years. Okay. That's neutral French oak, so there's not like a lot of barrel woody character to it. It's more complex and maybe softer than the 2014 was, just because it's had longer to kind of soften up in the barrel.
It's quite nice.
And then compared to the reserve version, we kind of switched to sort of a Solera style influence for the reserve Newport. So it's got 2013, 2014, and 2016 in it. So you get, with the reserve, you get definitely a lot more complexity, more richness. This one's just more kind of straightforward. Yes. I guess if you're somebody who's familiar with port, I would say the reserve is more like a tawny. Okay. And the Newport is more like a ruby. Okay. Cool. That's a good way to explain it. And can you talk a little bit about the fortification process? Like, I know we get fortified wine, and just to explain how this one gets to the alcohol percentage that it does. Yeah, we take the juice settlings from when we're making wine, and I ferment that and then send it off to a local distillery, and they distill that into this 90% alcohol spirit. So it has, kind of a sense of place in that it is entirely Nova Scotian. The materials used to make the distillate, the distillation is done here in the province. Yeah. And then we take that and we add it to an actively fermenting red wine after usually about 2 or 3 days. Yeah. When the wine is about 2/3 of the way through its ferment, and the alcohol, that brings it up to around 20% alcohol. Mm-hmm. And that stalls the ferment out because the yeast can't ferment above 16, 17. Okay. So that gives you the sweetness in the wine as well, the natural sweetness from the grapes, because the alcohol shuts down the ferment, so you get the the sweetness from the fruit, as well as some kind of heat and sweet from the alcohol itself.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I know this is typically viewed as more of a dessert wine, but you know, what would you pair this with for those people that maybe aren't big port drinkers? You know, what does this go with if nothing else, dessert or?
Yeah, I would say even not necessarily dessert. I would say kind of drink it beforehand or maybe afterwards.
Okay. Like almost not with the food, just on its own.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily have this with something really sweet.
Okay.
Just because like it is somewhat sweet, but it's not to the sweetness level of a dessert wine.
Gotcha.
So if you were to pair this with like ice cream, it would be horrible.
Okay.
But if you pair it with something like salted nuts, like really strong, rich cheeses, dark chocolate, things like that, just simple pairings. Those things will really work with a port style. But if you were to put it alongside a really sugary dessert, it probably would not show very well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. So as you mentioned, you know, we'd like to thank Barreling Tide Distillery is the local producer who helps us distill the wine, and Tasha Reed, the artist who helped us create the new label. So, you know, for us, we thank all of you guys for supporting local. We try our best to support local as well. And like you said, that's what makes this a 100% Nova Scotia product. So, Ben, I got to thank you again for running us through this variety of wines, and hopefully everyone enjoys it. We look forward to seeing you on March the 13th. Cheers, Ben.
Cheers.
Take care.